Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Blueprint for Men podcast. I almost went with a completely different name because I've done a few other podcasts in my day. But we're back for another recording. As we finish out the month of February, we are going to finish out our conversations we've been having around mental health and men. And so we've got a guest here as well. As we were talking before we hit record, I found out that Gabriel is yet another student of Marty. So I just jokingly said, let's just go back through all of his students to do some recordings as we go forward for our conversations. But Gabriel Trujillo is with us, and I've met him first last year online in a Men of Integrity group that I got plugged into, not stuck into. I chose to be plugged into this last year.
Doing really good, Mike.
I know. And so after a few months, though, through Tom Pike's conversation with Tom Pike, we decided to have another night. He'd been wanting to have one. So we've got two Men of Integrity groups that are online. Well, I guess there's more, but I know of two that are on Monday nights that Gabriel leads, and I lead out on Wednesday nights. And so right at the top of our podcast, we're going to just make sure you guys know about this because we're going to be talking about this important topic, especially because that's what Gabriel specializes in his practice. He is actually, we didn't clarify your actual title. Are you a licensed professional counselor, LPC?
That's good. That's it.
Okay, good. I got it.
There's so many different
I know.
names for mental health professionals out there, and I respond to different kinds
Okay.
of titles. But yes, that's the official license.
All right, the license. All right. Well, real quick though, I wanted to jump back in to just check with Marty first on if you've got anything you want to share with the guys listening, any particular items of interest or announcements.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we've always got stuff going on. I know that probably the biggest profile thing for me is, I mentioned this the other day, is got a 10-year anniversary celebration coming up on April 13. And if you're in the listenership, you could go online and look through the events. And if you live in the area, we really want to have a good group there to celebrate how God has led this ministry over the last 10 years. Hard to believe. And then just casting a vision for where we feel God is taking us. We're kind of calling it Blueprint 2.0. But also in addition, the spring season is when we all start getting busier with outdoor opportunities, events start ramping up. And so we've got, if you look on our website, we've got a listing of all the different events for 2025 in our network. And there's more that we could list, but there's I know for myself, I'm going to be traveling down to Florida for a men's convention, then out to Idaho the next weekend, Camp Miveden out in
Idaho.
Idaho there. And then after that, Minnesota in April and May in Northern California. So just kind of getting around. It's getting a busy season, but it's just neat to see doors open up, opportunities come along. But I really enjoy this podcast because it goes everywhere. I don't have to travel, and it's really neat. We're able to. This is just an FYI for anybody listening. You can look at the different data for the podcast, and you can see where it's being downloaded. I mean, it's downloaded on every continent. So it's just fun to see that something goes out so far. So welcome to this podcast, wherever you're from. So that's all I've got to say right now, Mike.
Oh, yes. I'm sure you have more to say, though. We have more to come from the mind of Marty because I have some ideas of what we're going to be doing in the future with Marty after we get past this 10th anniversary celebration. I'm looking forward to pulling some more things out of. I've got a particular Bible verse in my mind that I want to share with everybody and how we're going to get more of Marty out there. But for now, we've got what we think is a pretty important conversation around men and mental health. But at the same time, I want to introduce Gabriel here to you. And I wonder if you could just share a little bit, Gabriel, about yourself and where you are practicing your therapy and counseling and what you specialize in.
Sure. Yeah. Excited to be part of this podcast with you two fine gentlemen. So my name is Gabriel Trujillo, and Mike, I'm very impressed that you pronounced it correctly that first time. So I am, so I am from Colombian descent. I guess that's where the last name came from. My father's from Colombia in South America, and my mom's Puerto Rican. So I was actually born in Puerto Rico, but only lived there a few years. my parents moved to Miami, Florida when I was about maybe 2 years old. And then most of my life, I've actually still lived in the Chattanooga, Tennessee area, 18 years there. And now for the last 8 years, I live in North Georgia. So a little city called Adairsville that's right next to Calhoun, where the Georgia Cumberland Conference headquarters are, the conference center. So I am a mental health professional, licensed professional counselor. I've done counseling work professionally for a little over 10 years. And I've now done that, different settings, from community mental health agencies to working alongside churches, working in public school system, doing counseling work there. But for the last 3 years, I've done private practice work, so in person and also online. Since COVID, a lot of people are now more used to the online services, so that's been interesting. But beyond what I do professionally, I'm a husband. I've been married for almost 12 years, so March the 3rd will be my 12-year anniversary. And
Nice.
I have 3 kids. So my oldest, Celeste, my oldest daughter, she's 7 years old. And my middle daughter, Estella, is 4 years old. And I have a son. His name is Lucas, and he's a year old, born in November 15, 2023. So
Busy world for you, 3 kids.
yeah, a handful. And then, we're done unless God has other plans in the future. But for now, that's the plan.
Yep, I said that at 2 kids. That's where mine are. So I have 2 adult kids. So
Yeah, I
well,
think that, yeah, we're similar, Mike. And my wife and I, once we had a boy and then a girl, it's like, okay, boy, girl. I think we're good.
Yeah.
I know my son, I think they've got 4 girls, so they just, you had 2 girls and you got that boy, so we're done.
Yeah. I'm glad she talked me into a third. I feel like it's one of those things with kids, you're never fully ready. I mean, I remember even before having our first one, I felt
For sure.
like, there's never enough money. The stars aren't quite aligned, but you just got to take a leap of faith. Okay, let's try this parenting thing. And then you get used to 1, and then you get used to 2. And then I kind of was like, are we sure we want to, rock the boat? Because we're just getting used to 2, but she just felt the family wasn't quite complete yet. And I'm so happy she talked me into a third. We love our son. So they're so different than the girls. And
For sure.
it's been a blessing. So God is good. I love being a dad. I love the work that I do as a counselor, and really my passion for men's ministry, working alongside with Blueprint for Men. It helps me in these different roles. I just feel like without the different groups that Blueprint for Men provides to help in spiritual maturity and other aspects of fatherhood. I don't know where I would be. I mean, I'm not perfect now, but it helps to be able to be mentored by people in different stages of the fatherhood journey.
Mm-hmm. One thing, Tom and Mike and myself and Rudy, who's also down in Columbia. And we've had several people that we've been kind of massaging our mission and vision and all these things, these heady things. And when you do that, you really come up with some things like, okay, that's good. And I'm always having little epiphanies at 2 a.m. or whatever. And I had one the other day that I really feel kind of epitomizes what you just described there, Gabriel. And that is 3 words: calling men higher. Calling men higher. I just feel like whatever we're doing, there's a calling. Now, God uses us. He might use, you, Gabriel, in a specialized way because you have an authority because of a degree and a training. It's like you go to a doctor and the doctor says something that's different than your grandma telling you the same thing. You know what I'm saying? And so there's this calling. There's a voice in your heart and your mind. It could be coming from another person, but men in general, we need that that voice. We need those words. We need that direction. And then where is it calling us? It's calling us to step up. We all have, like you said, there's, you've had a lot of education in mental health area, but you still are a man, and there's always an upward pathway that God puts in front of us. And that's the beautiful thing. And I think that is what this podcast today is really all about.
Yeah, the phrase higher up and higher in comes to mind. If you've ever read the Chronicles of Narnia books, it's the last of the last chapter, that last book, when they get to the real Narnia and they're climbing and going up, and I forget, one of the characters keeps going ahead and turning around and yelling at them to go higher up and higher in. And I think that's the metaphor there, is it's always God calling us that direction.
Yep.
And this life, to me, it starts, and yet I believe it's like, if you ever, I don't know if you could even use this metaphor, but like if eternity is this steep climb of just growth, this life is just the tiny little blip right before that steep. And so
Right.
we're still headed in the same direction, but we're getting ourselves ready for the real event, the real,
Right.
reason why we exist. And it's so important for us to get it right now. It's not something you take lightly. On the flip side of that, though, you don't take yourself too seriously. You got to be able to laugh at yourself. Right. But yeah, there are important issues that show up that we need to, as men, deal with. One of the questions that I want to say I've not even asked the people I've been working, that we've talked to all month long here in February, but maybe I have. But one of the questions that's come to my mind, Gabriel, is as you've been working with men, as you work with men, what kind of rises to the top that you deal with the most with men, just in general? I guess if you could narrow it down to just individual counseling or therapy with guys, what is it like that's something that shows up most often that you've experienced?
Yeah. Well, in general, the most common reason people come to therapy is anxiety issues. There's a lot of different subtypes to an anxiety disorder. It is the number one diagnosis alongside depression. So in the upper, depends on what source you're getting the information from, it's close to 30%, somewhere around that ballpark. Now, men don't come to therapy as often as women do.
Is that 30% of men have anxiety disorder?
30% of the general population in the United States have anxiety, an anxiety disorder. Like that's the most common disorder that people go to therapy for.
Got it.
But as far as for men, I would say probably the most common issue that men come to therapy with me for is something to do with a sexual addiction. And that could just be because of seeing my profile, seeing specialization that I have. But beyond that, though, I do believe that many men struggle with that. Now, it is one of those things, like we say that anger is a secondary emotion, right? That there's that iceberg analogy of, you see most of the iceberg is underneath the water. You just see a part of the ice above. Some of that, I think, equates to you're noticing impulsive sexual behaviors, but what's underneath is trauma. It's anger. It's loneliness. It's all kinds of different wounds that could maybe lead somebody to have a escapism. Just the porn or the sexual problematic behavior is just a symptom of maybe a deeper issue. But I would say if there's one presenting problem that's the most common with the men that come to seek me, is that probably it's that issue.
Do you find is it range between single guys and married guys, or is it like guys who are married who've never dealt with this, but it's kind of just manifesting itself in a marriage somehow? Or is there like a balance of, I don't even know,
Yeah.
single guys versus guys married or have a family that are still needing this help?
Yeah, I don't think it matters whether they're single or not. I think that my temptation initially was to say that more of the married guys come in. Unfortunately, a lot of us guys, we're just pretty stubborn when it comes to getting help. We wait until a lot of heartache has happened. And even then, the window of motivation that closes quickly, because we just want to be so self-sufficient, and we tend to be in denial that we need help. So sometimes there's the joke that it's like, men come into therapy with a footprint from their wives kicking them to go see a therapist.
Yeah.
So I do get some of that of they're in a crisis marital situation after there's been discovery. We call it the discovery phase, or D-Day, when basically all hell broke loose, poo-poo hit the fan. You were discovered. And so now it's time to, okay, the marriage is over, do something about it. So certainly I do get sometimes those men who go in there because they're in a crisis situation. But I do, and I really admire these guys especially. I admire anyone that wants to go to therapy for sure, because it's not easy. But I admire the single guys who haven't had those crises yet, but just for preventative measures already, because they see that this is something helpful for them to come clean about some of this and process with a therapist that has some specialization in this. I just feel like if that became more normalized, there could be a lot less heartache and less generational trauma. I just feel like a lot of good can kind of domino effect from people taking more preventative measures instead of waiting until there's so many other crises because part of what you have to do as a therapist, same with any medical professional, when someone comes in, you have to kind of triage, you have to assess what is the highest priority to deal with first. And so sometimes they come in for one issue, but as you are engaging in assessment and asking questions, we may have a set of other things that we have to hit first. Someone comes in, wants marital counseling, but then you've got addiction issues. The marital counseling is not going to go very far when there's other things that are higher priority that are going to skew the progress. It's not getting to the root of the issue. So, to answer your question, I don't think it necessarily matters, single, married, but certainly I think the motivations are different, right? People's why is different, and everyone has their why. Okay, counseling, for many, especially that don't have insurance, it's an expensive thing. It's taking an hour of time, and nobody's chomping at the bit to go and talk about personal things, right? I'm not handing out cotton candy necessarily. I do try to be playful, and I like to be engaging and energetic, but I'm also, people are going to get what they pay for. I'm going to ask tough questions. We're going to get deep into things, and it's hard work. So to me, it's admirable, those that reach a point, whatever their why is, be it their marriage is about to fall apart, or they just came to that rock bottom spot of, I'm tired of being here again. I swore this was the last time I was going to look at porn, or I was going to, whatever it is. And so now they're being convicted that the time has come to take an action step of maybe begin this relationship of counseling potentially.
Do you find that guys who embrace that they need some help are in the better place? Like, I imagine you have guys that come in saying, I'm only here because she wants me here, but do they turn a corner at any point? Do you find that pattern that shows up where they's like, oh, I guess I do need some help?
Yeah, sometimes. We all, I think, have that in us, that we want to be so self-sufficient, or we feel like we have more in control than we really do. I think that the clients that I see that make really good long-term progress are those who have that humility, that they've reached a point where they're ready to let go of the reins. When it comes to treating a compulsive sexual behavior or sex addiction, we can call it different things. There's phases that we go through with a client, okay? And obviously we do a lot of assessments at the beginning to try to gauge how severe the addiction is, get a history, go through, like I said earlier, prioritizing root causes and severity, which one we have to treat first. But really, the phase one is breaking out of denial. That's phase one, breaking out of denial, because every addict has denial. There's been numerous times where they have felt through their own thought patterns, their own core beliefs, the thoughts communicate, I can stop whenever I want to. It's not that severe compared to other people. I'm doing way better. This is not as severe as Joe's issue or Jeff or blah, blah, blah. So what we do, we have several exercises that we do where we go through the powerless moments. So consequences inventory, a big list of different types of consequences. And we have them begin to actually circle and label. And it seems intense for some people, but we're not trying to shame anybody at all. But what has to happen is we want to keep that window open of vulnerability and motivation for change as big as possible, because what happens is, because it's hard work, it's so easy for that denial to come back. Then you justify, well, it's not worth the price or this, and then they go back to old patterns. Breaking through denial, what we do with those consequences list is that painful work where they need to face and see how out of control this really was, how much money I actually spent on this, how it almost cost me my marriage, how this led to issues at work, or in some cases, people even get into legal trouble because of how out of control lust can become. So that phase one of breaking out of denial, for some men, it might take 1 or 2 sessions, and they buy into this. They're like, yes, I clearly see this as an issue, and they're ready to go all in, and they're pretty good at completing the homework that I give, and you can tell beyond the counseling, in between sessions, they're reading material. They're just very motivated. But unfortunately, you also have those that it takes us several sessions to get out of that phase. But it's a very important phase. It's the same as, I'm sure some of the listeners have heard of the 12-step tradition in the anonymous groups, which is one of the most successful frameworks for helping people long-term get out of addiction. Well, step one is admitting powerlessness. Okay. You have to reach there. And I think it's really the whole sinner to Christ experience beyond addiction. It's reaching a point where we get a genuine realization that we really are doomed, that we are sinners, or, the addict, that my best behavior of all that willpower and motivation to try to control this is not good enough. I can't, right? And that's tough to let go of that, but it's critical to reach a point where somebody is ready to move out of addiction into wholeness, into restoration, into a successful recovery.
Do you, go ahead, Marty. I kept asking questions.
There's a lot of different thoughts I have. When it comes to, addiction and shame and all of that, particularly in the context of marriage, sex addiction and pornography and just all that's blown up, the availability of that kind of thing today is just, it's not like this lust issue hasn't always been there, but it's been like gasoline on a fire with the availability. Um, what do you see as far as guys? They like you say, the shoe in the back, the footprint in the back of the, you're getting shoved into this because if you don't, I'm going to divorce you. The D word gets thrown around, and then it's like, oh, I don't want that, and so, but it seems like, from my experience working with men, is that all too often it's too little, too late. Do what fraction of people are able to pull it out once it is brought to that level? It just seems like guys' pain tolerance in the emotional area and the denial, like you're talking about, is way high, and a woman's is much lower, and so she's ready to be done with this nonsense much quicker than he is, and it surprises him for some reason.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. So you asked kind of what percentage of guys are actually successful and where the marriage gets restored completely after
exactly.
And I don't have on the top of my head, obviously, a percentage of that, but a way I can answer that question is that as in many things in mental health, okay, you're driving down the road and there's 2 ditches you can fall in, okay? There's extremes on different sides. On one end, I've encountered clients, maybe a husband and wife, that there's been an infidelity or some, sex addiction, something with compulsive problematic sexual behavior is part of why they're in therapy. Maybe they're in a crisis on the verge of divorce, and you'll have some couples that are in a bit of denial themselves, or not in a healthy place emotionally, where they're overtly optimistic. Actually, they just want to rush through going through the motions, and they think they're completely healthy before they actually are. And what they don't fully understand is when something like infidelity has taken place, there's been a lot of moving parts prior to that action that you got to unpack. That takes time. So there are some people that don't understand really how long this therapy process has to go towards, and not just therapy, different maybe group supports or treating other underlying issues correctly before there's been adequate healing, where we can all kind of agree on this marriage has been restored in a way that's going to set them up long-term for success, right? Not just putting bandages on wounds, but treating the underlying condition. So you'll have some of those overtly optimistic, kind of, they want to just superficially go through the therapy and then, okay, we're good. I think that we're ready to move back in together. Okay. However, I do think I need to talk about the other extreme, and I'm noticing this trend actually among therapists, and even this has been happening in maybe some circles within our church community, where there's also been issues like this that have come out, but you do have a man who, for all observation that we could see, is trying, is humble, is willing to do all the accountability,
right, and
is repentant. And then there's this bit of, nothing's going to be good enough. It's almost like any issue that he might have where he's still struggling with pride, then we label him that he must be a narcissist. And it's not true. Not everyone's a narcissist. Not all adverse experiences are traumas. And also, even though we're extremely compassionate to the betrayed partner, and we'll just say for the explanation here, let's assume that it's the male the man has been unfaithful to the woman. So the wife is the betrayed partner, the husband is the betrayer. But that doesn't mean that why this marriage is failing is only because of the husband's infidelity. That there's sometimes this misconception that the betrayer is bad guy and the betrayed is good person all the time. Often there's other issues that have happened in the marriage as well. It's not that any of it justifies a betrayal or addiction, but it's that for counseling to be successful, we all have to be accountable to each other. There's none of this, fix him completely and his sex issue, and I am the one that needs just complete compassion. And I don't think therapists, mean to do this, or coaches, but I'm going to be honest and say that I see the damage of sometimes some of this treatment where we almost go too much in the pendulum the other way, where the Holy Spirit could be doing something here to restore. Because I believe it's a biblical principle that marriages can be restored, that God
Absolutely
does offer forgiveness, and that it could happen. But sometimes when we're too stuck on being victim, or even without even meaning, as therapists, we are enabling this type of narrative of what's happening here. And someone could be on their journey of restoration, but in a way we could be unintentionally enabling someone to be bitter and resentful and not openly forgive. So obviously there's nuance there, because forgiveness should be earned. There should be a process of accountability, but I hope that the listeners get what I'm trying to say, that you can fall in a ditch as well, where there could be some information where we say the accountability only goes one way, where even though one person is the one that initially kind of maybe triggered the crisis of what's happening in the marriage, still both have to humble themselves unto the Lord and be fully committed, if that's what they want to do, if that's what they're convicted of, to restore the marriage. So I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, I know that, I hear a man's side of the story, and of course, I'm married. I know the woman's side of the story in a limited way. And we're both sinners. I mean, men and women are both sinners. Men tend to be the predominant perpetrators, and I'll just say that right up front. But the contributing factor that women play sometimes can be swept under the rug. So we all need to humility is really where it starts, and this forgiveness is just critical. If we don't have a humble, contrite spirit from God, he can't do anything, And then on the same side, if we don't have a humble, forgiving spirit, you can't heal. And so that's probably one of the greatest obstacles I see. God can do anything with a willing heart, pretty much. So you can't undo the wounds of the past, guys. There are things that we do that cannot be swept under the rug. They are heinous and they're bad and they cause a lot of harm. But over time, there can be healing. The scars can be there forever. Trust takes a long time to build back up. And I think that some people, and this is my take on it, they don't have enough belief that there can be a turning around, and they just want to push, the easy button and say, let's just divorce.
Yeah, that's right. It's a personal decision, and each case has its nuances.
Yep.
And it's devastating when you're the betrayed partner. Women have post-traumatic stress symptoms. I mean, it is a serious thing, and definitely maybe there's been counsel in the past through people that perhaps weren't fully equipped to do that counsel, and there may be minimizing that pain that they've gone through, and too quick of a rush to forgive and reconcile, where the addict has not changed, hasn't gone through the process, right? That's definitely true, and that's not, at all, of course, what I'm advocating for. But as you've mentioned, Marty, the other ditch that we can fall into is that we don't believe God can restore.
Yeah.
And that is what takes humility. And again, it's personal. There's a lot of different cases. It's case by case, but I believe God is still in the restoring business, and I believe that marriages are under attack like never before. And so I think that we should, along with advocacy and empowerment to betrayed partners and motivating men to go up, right? To get healthy, to get accountable with things for sure. I think we also should be celebrating stories of reconciliation, of mistakes that have happened, and how God restores beauty for ashes. Because what we really see in those success cases, and they do happen, okay? I wish I could tell you that it's very common. I wouldn't say it's common, but I wouldn't say it's rare either. You know, success cases do happen. Now, these cases are complex. They do take a while, but I think it's good to keep advertising that and sharing a testimony of how God has restored a relationship, because what we see happens is the marriage gets to be better than it ever was before. Not to say it shouldn't have taken all that crisis and addiction and pain to get there, but what's beautiful is what God can do. So we see, with both people being willing to change, how couples can get to a point where intimacy is better than it's ever been. The man's getting healthy, and really what's happening after the man has gone through recovery process, accountability, sponsorship, just all in, well, the woman can't help but change herself, right? Even though obviously she was on the receiving end and hurtful, but God does a work in her too. And that's what I'm really talking about, because sometimes, unfortunately, I've also met some women who have chosen to just harbor and close their heart towards the forgiveness process. And I've just seen how, maybe even not intentionally, but some counselor or coaches or different things out there, people's books or all this, kind of empowers this, like, no, you know, you're supposed, just a narrative where I don't know how fully biblical it actually is.
Mm-hmm.
There's like two pieces here I wanted to ask. Let me start with, so this is kind of a big general question though. When you see a guy who's thriving, maybe he's done some counseling, and I may or may not be including guys who are married in this as well, but I'm just curious, how would you describe this guy who's thriving, whether or not he's been in counseling? I'm sure you've got guys that you work with or talk to, at least, that haven't ever done therapy, but they're doing well, or because you are aware of when somebody's doing well, and you know what it takes for someone to be able to thrive emotionally, to be spiritually and emotionally mature. What do you see when you see a guy who's doing well and thriving?
Man, that's an interesting question. I'll try to answer it. I'm a little intimidated because I just feel like you both could probably answer that better than me. But I guess I have the profession that I do, but I think it's similar to all the conversations that we have with men. You know, once you start to be in this field of just like the passion that God gives you to help other men, just because you were helped, right? We all have our story of how we were mentored and helped and led to someone called us up, as Marty said earlier in the podcast, to go higher. You know, it doesn't take long, not even in counseling, but just talking to a man, it doesn't take long before you can, I think, make some pretty accurate assumptions. And I know you guys have had so many talks with different men. And so what I notice is, first, in the subject matter of what a guy talks about, how I notice his kids relate to him, how he talks about his kids, how he talks about his wife, how his wife acts around him. You can tell a lot. You can tell a lot by how comfortable a man is with vulnerable topics, going beyond just the typical sports and all that. And of course, it's not that we always have to have some deep heart-to-heart conversation all the time. It's okay to talk about hobbies and all this, but I think that there's a natural
Like he's willing to go down
Yeah.
a deeper road.
And I think it doesn't take that long. Someone
Right.
that's healthy, that there'll be aspects of that they'll get a little bit deep. I notice guys kind of healthy and thriving, they're not afraid of that. They do that every once in a while in the conversation. So I would say the last one I would add is how they handle their mistakes.
Oh, that's a good one.
So I respect a guy, and I really believe it's a sign of good health mentally that owns up to the mistakes in a way that's you're not just beating yourself up over too much, but you're also not lying about it or making it trivial, but in a way just you're opening up to it and accepting that you're making mistakes and you apologize and kind of just own up to it, as opposed to you're just getting that sense of like either not addressing it at all or
Making a big deal out of it.
yeah, because I think those kind of things start to kind of come back to root core beliefs that could be in alignment with God's reality, and I think with that contributing to good health overall and mental fortitude, or someone who hasn't adequately addressed wounds. So I think that's how I would answer that question.
Yeah, some good stuff there. I know that one thing that is foundational, and it takes a while for us to develop this intimacy with God, but out of the intimacy with God and with other brothers, I find that is kind of a foundational thing that most guys don't have. And for them to heal and have better intimacy with their wife and children, sometimes it's just not going to happen without those two other pieces. Therapy alone can I look at it this way. Whatever we're doing, if we exclude God, you can do it really well, but you can only get to here. And when you add the Holy Spirit and God working in a man's life, and he's surrounded by other godly men that are encouraging and praying with and for him, it's going to allow this to bump way beyond the best. I mean, and I'm not knocking therapy. I mean, even secular therapy is going to make progress. But I maintain that if there is a creator, and I know there is, and he designed us and he knows what's best for us, and it's written in his word, and we really delve into that on a daily basis and submit to his will, the outcomes are just going to be what you're talking about, Gabriel. He's going to have that kind of heart level connection that is unmistakable.
I agree with that completely. And I don't, it's not any knock on therapy at all. In fact, if I can be completely transparent with how I'm viewing the counseling process, and I'm so blessed with this career, I'll just say I get so much fulfillment with my job. And I thank
Amen.
God that I get to do what I do, and they can provide for my family, where my wife can be a stay-at-home mom, and no one goes into counseling for money. Okay. So I know it gets expensive and different things too, but it's anyways, but there's a high demand. There's more people in counseling than have ever been in counseling before. Okay. So on one end, I think culture has really accepted and continues to accept more and more the benefits of counseling. And I'm gonna go and say we need to be careful with that too.
Yeah.
We can romanticize the counseling process.
Mm-hmm.
And by that, I mean, God wants us healthy, and there's a point where we don't need the counseling anymore. And we should celebrate that. We shouldn't get too comfortable with these labels of diagnosing, right? And that's a controversial topic even among mental health professionals. And obviously, I'm not talking about everything here. Okay, there are some categories of mental health diagnoses where we're not talking about sort of the organic differences and some of the more severe ones. But if I would just use, for example, something common like attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, when you're too comfortable with a label, you start to hear people say things commonly like, well, that's just my ADHD that made me do this or that. And
The
it's,
victim.
yeah, if we're not careful, we don't mean to, this kind of goes back to other things I've talked about earlier in the podcast. We can go too far in getting comfortable with identities and labels where I don't believe that's a biblical way to look at how God matures us and in relationship with him through the power of the Holy Spirit. Our identity should be in Christ, right? And so
Yes.
obviously anyways, there's always nuance. I always am careful with making absolute statements, but we need the Holy Spirit. We need a walk with God, a connection with him, community. Counseling helps, but counseling is not the answer to everything. And I love that, that there's a lot of need and my job is fulfilling, but there's also, I don't like hearing that people think that counseling is the end all be all. It's not, right? It's part of the solution.
Part of what I've expressed in the past is that a good counselor, like if I, as a hospital chaplain, if it comes up that somebody might be interested in counseling, I would tell them, I'd say, well, here's one good mark of a counselor or a therapist is that they will be empowering you to be a better person and they won't make you dependent on them. And so I'm hearing that in you as well. And especially as a biblical, or you're not a biblical counselor, but you bring God into your practice, I'm sure. And so you want someone, if they believe in God, like I believe in God in that sense, where we believe God can help me. I want to help you learn how to tap into that power that's vastly more powerful than my degree or my experience. God can do things that we can't do, but there are certain windows or doors or parts of our lives, just rooms in the house, so to speak, that can be accessed through this process of counseling and therapy that God can then open up and do some more healing. So if they're not ever talked about, not ever brought up, well, then they might be bouncing around in the head somewhere, and God can reach those too. But it's like, I don't know how. Maybe you can speak to this, either of you guys, but it's like God can't always reach us if our mind just isn't able to focus into his voice in that sense, or to get somebody to help us have that voice spoken into our lives. I think that's some of the role that good Christian counseling and therapy can bring. Just good mentoring, Christian mentoring can bring, is that voice of God in some way. I don't know. You guys have any responses to that in terms of how do you bring God into this process?
Well, I want to kind of maybe address this from another angle. I really fixated on the word empowered. And I feel like God is the ultimate source of power. He is the ultimate empowerer. Our identity, ultimately, when we really get our head around it, is in Christ. Mm-hmm. Our identity is we're a son of God. And when we hear these kind of terms, I know, Mike, you have some affirmations and stuff that you do on a daily basis. And I think that I need to get that shared, because I feel like guys need tools to help them in this area of being empowered. Yep. We got to change our minds. But I think that you can say it yourself, Mike. Gabriel as a therapist could tell me, but the more voices that can undo the damage from the past. That's why I like men's groups so much. You feel heard, you feel affirmed, you feel empowered to keep going when most guys are just going to quit. And so I feel this empowerment ultimately from God. Let's get as much empowerment as we can, because ultimately if we feel weak, we're defeated. That's depression, that's discouragement, that's nothing good's coming out of that. That's not humility. Anyway,
it's not a healthy
I don't know if you have any
humility.
thoughts on that.
Yeah. So there's a famous psychiatrist named M. Scott Peck. So he wrote a famous book called The Road Less Traveled. And my favorite quote of his describing what counseling actually is the following: mental health or counseling, which says the commitment to reality at all costs. The commitment to reality at all costs. For that sacred hour as we're sitting there in the protection of the privacy, the confidentiality, the things that you get to hear because you're being trusted by this individual to share something that's very personal, and they're trusting you. Sometimes for the first time, they're sharing it. And that dialogue that we do back and forth, we are, in a nutshell, right? There's a lot that happens, but in a nutshell, we're committing to reality. We're committing to pursue what is the truth together. And it's sometimes a painful experience, but it's how we get healthy. One of the most widely used and researched frameworks to help people out of anxiety or depression or different common disorders is what's called cognitive behavior therapy, okay? Aaron Beck and Albert Ellis, the people kind of attributed to inventing this, simply put, it's a teaching that counselors help clients through, that they identify their thoughts. What kind of thoughts are you having, and how does that influence the way you feel? How does that influence what you do? And you start to learn that your thoughts are influenced by your beliefs, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And beliefs aren't always rational. So it's a discipline that goes into identifying, what do I believe about myself? Really, what do I really think about who is Gabriel? Who really is Gabriel? What would Marty say about Gabriel? How would my wife describe who I am, and all these things? So my point with all of that is that's really what we're aiming to do in therapy. But, I feel like without a theistic worldview, secular counseling misses the boat, because the true north, the truth, he said he is the truth. I am the way, the truth, and the life.
Amen.
Is Christ himself. So even in something beautiful like counseling, as you mentioned, Marty, someone may feel some alleviations of their symptoms to a degree, but really it's just going to be to that degree, because as counselors, we could give compassion all day. We could reflect and create a space for people to share. But, we're not helping them go all the way if we're also not wrestling with clients regarding that pursuit of truth at all costs, which sometimes it's a very difficult process that takes some time and wrestling, but it's so worth it and fulfilling when you notice the wheels turning, when God connects with people through that, when they get accountability, they get relationships restored. Like you mentioned, Mike, earlier, you don't want to make them dependent on you or just drag this on forever, right? That we help them restore and then meet these needs where they don't need you anymore, right? Or you do less sessions, maybe once a month after a while, and then, hey, you're fired, in the sense that, hey, we can both agree you're going to be okay, because you will always have some stress, and that's okay. Not all stress is bad, but now we've identified, we've reached the goals, right? Having them be centered on their goals. I think we can sometimes miss that piece, that identity comes from Christ, right? That they connect to that truth. That's why time with him is so important, to kind of recalibrate our belief system.
Oh, I can't agree enough on that one. It takes a degree of humility as a therapist. If you're a therapist who's got a ton of success and you help people have breakthrough, but at the same time you're setting people up to always need you, I don't know how. I mean, maybe that's good. It's better than nothing, I guess. But the humility, I think, of the Christian therapist does just what you're saying. You let that person go, or at least, if they still feel like they need some support, well, that's okay. But you let them go now that they've established their identity in God and Christ, they can have a healthy approach, or a more healthy approach to their living. So I have, we didn't bring this up in our first.
I just have I got
go
to
ahead.
jump in here and just say
Go
this
right
one
ahead.
thing.
You say it.
It's funny how these word combinations sometimes come to us, and I don't know, there's almost like some people that are in therapy, like it's almost like a professional codependency.
Yeah.
You,
Oh,
you know,
that's it. That's the word, Marty.
it's like, I need your money, and as long as you're willing to come, let's keep it rolling.
It's just so
And the
dysfunctional.
therapist is part of the problem. And I'm not bashing therapy, please
No, no,
understand.
no. I know you're
But
not, but you're right.
They're out there, I bet, though.
oh yeah, of course.
True.
You know, they're just there to coddle and comfort. And it's like, well, you know, we want to get healing, don't we? I think that's the, and I'll just throw this in, you know, one of my favorite stories that, you know, Jesus healing somebody was a man at the pool of Bethesda. You know, Jesus comes right there, and he's making all these excuses why he can't, you know, he has been there for 38 years. It's because, you know, I don't have any friends to get me into the water, and he had become comfortable in his brokenness, and it was his identity. And how many people, I mean, you know, Gabriel, you see lots of people, and I would say that kind of is true.
Yeah. Confessions of a Therapist. Okay, I've done this for over 10 years. Just being honest, that it's tricky because you do make a livelihood from it. But, you know, as I'm getting a little older and a little bit more seasoned and a little bit more secure in my identity in Christ, I'm becoming a little more bold in telling clients the way it is. I do it lovingly.
Yep, sure.
And it's never, I'm not a confrontational person by nature. By nature, I do want people to like me. I am sensitive to people's emotions most of the time. But, you know, Marty, to the point you just made with that story of the pool of Bethesda, there are times where I'll have clients that are happy to pay money, but they're just not following any of the recommendations. They are going through the motions. And I'm not going to say this has happened a lot of times, but I am, if I could just say, just proud of myself. It's kind of a cheesy way to say that, but I can't think of another way to say it. But where I've gone in and I've had to say, hey, I'm just noticing this, and I don't think you're ready for counseling right now. I don't think this is something. And you know, there's been times where they've been very appreciative for that gentle confrontation, and things do turn around. However, there have been times that people don't come back, because once you start to ask some questions and get out of because they even bring those same issues of staying superficial, they'll bring that into therapy. Some people do that professionally. They'll talk and talk and talk about all kinds of different issues, even in therapy, even with paying you good money. They're expert at evading different things when you start to ask questions about the heart. But, you know, I'm getting to a point more where I'm doing that faster and faster in sessions, where I just leave it up to God anyway. And I'm kind about it, obviously. And
Sure.
I have my own counseling and my own supervision. And I try to stay as objective and kind of open-minded and correcting my mistakes, because I'm not perfect professionally. But we all can fall under that. And we don't want to be enablers. We don't want to be professional codependent coddlers. And sometimes in therapy, we can get into that without meaning to. And that's not the pursuit of reality at all costs. That means that sometimes there's going to be people that need to be called out, that need to reassess their motivations for therapy. And it might mean we might have a tense conversation in counseling. But you know what? It's a good place in counseling where it's confidential.
Yep.
And it's between two
It's
people.
safe.
It's safe, that we can review these things, because often that's kind of the surrogate. A counselor becomes a bit of a surrogate, whatever, spouse or friend, or by that I mean they're not just having that issue with you as a counselor, right? If people are having issues connecting and being direct and getting out of this like constant politeness, it's very likely that's happening outside of the counseling office. So there's where the experimentation can happen. And as a therapist, I can't let my anxiety of their confrontation get in the way of helping a client be whole. And that's sometimes hard because I'm a human being too. You know, I'm not just changing the tires of your car. I'm also someone who can be sensitive towards your criticism of me or your defensive response to something I'm saying, even if it's done in a kind way.
Do you lead with when your therapy? Do you lead it all with that thought from M. Scott Peck?
I have it in my website, but I don't always say that. Maybe I should as part of a.
I mean, you start out just so you know, reality is going to be pursued at any cost. Do you agree with this? Because you're not just coming in here to have conversations with me. We want to move in a direction. Okay, so speaking of reality, I wanted to kind of wind us down with this last kind of what is the question? It's a question that has some it's got to be unpacked a little bit, or you might not have anything to say. I don't know. So where we are in history and our movement that we are part of, the Adventist movement. So I want to just hear your perspective on what does a guy need to hear when it comes to where we are in our history and what should be his priorities. If you were to just be able to have a straight conversation about this reality right now, right? So at any cost, just pretend he's listening and he's ready to face this reality, and just let's take a look at where we are in history. I personally believe Jesus is about to return. Nobody knows the time or anything like that, but it just feels pretty close to me. Give me some thoughts on just your perspective as you've worked with men. You've been connected with Blueprint. This is a ministry that it's a movement that's reaching out to Adventist men to try to get men into a deeper walk with God through discipleship and getting to know themselves better. I'm going on to what I could say here, but I want to hear what you guys have to say, but especially you, Gabriel, on, what is it about this last day, this last message that we have for the world that you'd like to be able to have men kind of get better so that they can get better?
I could jump in. Let me just share a thought. I feel like the antidote to a lot of the anxiety today is hope.
Yeah.
And hope is what the world really is desperate for. And I think that the combination of hope that there is an eternal life to come, that's, the ultimate hope is that there's more than this world, whatever suffering we're going through, we're going to get through it, and we've got an eternity to be gained. That's a hope that springs eternal from my chest, and to know that that is coming soon, and there's a sense of urgency about, hey, this is coming, and but then the other part of the hope, I think, and that's where counseling comes in, and Blueprint for Men and groups, is that we're sharing hope in the present. It's not some future thing. It's like, no, there's hope right now. There can be change right now. To me, that summarizes what I feel in my heart is the simplest way to say it is it's got to be a message of hope, not fear, because fear, we've got enough of that going around. Hello, Gabriel, you got anything to say?
And it's the number one command in the Bible, some version of do not fear. The most common command is some version of not being afraid or do not fear, something like that, because of that very reason. So what came to mind is, Jesus prayed, thy kingdom come, thy will be done.
Right.
So it's important to recognize that we, being healthy now, experience what heaven is going to be like to some extent now. Here's my observation regarding men is that we're really great at cerebral information, right? Yep. Adventist men, particularly, if this is most of the audience of our podcast, we know about the fundamental beliefs. We know how to defend doctrine. We know about the three angels' message, all important things and beautiful things that makes us distinct from our other Christian friends. But beyond all of that cerebral, I think there's still lack in the practical.
Yeah.
So how does that translate to being a healthy man? Why is it that women are the ones leading the ministries? Why is it rare to see a full-time men's ministry position in our conferences or in our unions? Is it because men don't have the need? No. Why is it so rare to see a vibrant men's ministry in churches, even churches with lots of money, different conferences that have large churches? It's rare to find thriving men's ministry. Why, when it comes to vacation Bible schools or kids ministry things, men are missing in action? They're not there. There's a disconnect from the cerebral information to the practical implementation. I can get even more specific. These are the issues that guys have struggled with. Managing our money, sexual integrity, and in our marriages and relationships with our kids, right? We should be the most enthusiastic and leading when it comes to to kids ministry and vacation Bible school, showing kids that guys can be goofy and have fun, and it's fun to follow Christ. We should be taking lead and involved. But what happens is we're great at the providing part, right? People are working really hard, but then we come home and we're exhausted. And so we look at Sabbath school and church activities as like, feed me. Okay, let's have a discussion. But when you look at like Sabbath school discussions, it stays very cerebral. And rarely do we get deep into the heart. Well, hey, brother so-and-so, did you reconcile with your wife? Or how about spending time with your kids? Or how about calling your adult daughter that you're upset with? It's not a safe setting to begin to have conversations like that. So that's what I would say. The great controversy and all this stuff, it's important. All that is good. Well, how is that going to happen successfully when as men, we're still afraid to address our wounds, to get honest and real with someone when people are not having access to our hearts? That's what I would say. We got to get better at bridging that information into the practical.
Mm-hmm. And it's really hard to get there. I have been down this path long enough to know that, and I said this earlier on, is it's rare a man that has the wisdom to adjust his course before everything breaks down. He's got to come to the end of himself and be totally broken most of the time before serious change is going to happen. It's just unfortunate, but we've got to provide those on-ramps or off-ramps to get from where he's at to a place where there can be some repair, counseling, small group, all these kind of things. Because this is really, there's a whole nother rabbit trail, but I find that most men over a period of time find that not only is it not safe in the church to talk about things that are really on his heart, that are causing trouble, but even in many marriages, it's not safe for him to share with his wife. I saw a little funny one today, a little video. This is just, I shared this with my wife. I said, I saw this video and there was this woman that came to the door, opening a door from one room to the other. I guess he's in the living room, the guy, the husband, and she puts her hands on her hips and she says, "We need to talk." And he looks at her and he goes, "What'd I do wrong?" And then a little bit later, he comes to the door and says, "We need to talk." And then she goes, "What'd you do wrong?" So the onus is the man is always doing something wrong. And if it's not safe for him to be honest about his failures, because guys tend to be gas pedals. We're on the go, we're moving, we're not as cautious most of the time. And so we have more crash and burn experiences in life. And women, it destabilizes them. They don't like it. And so they will just, they don't want to hear it. And there's anxiety that goes into his life. And he goes, well, if she's going to act like that. So guys have to have a place where they can talk about this and get some healing from the standpoint of just being able to process. And once, I've seen this over and over, once guys experience that, they go, that felt good to be able to talk about life, not in a We're not bashing women. We're not bashing our spouses. That has no place.
No.
I'm just telling, if any woman is listening to this, no place in what we're about. But at the same time, we've got to be able to talk about things that need to be talked about. And if you're a woman listening to this, be a safe woman. Be humble enough and understand that if your man's not talking to you, it's probably because maybe you've proven to be unsafe. I don't know, but ask yourself that question. Anyway, I went down a rabbit trail there, pardon.
No, but that was good. Here.
It's understandable. Yes. This is the invitation, though, as we wind down our series on mental health. This is our invitation for guys to take advantage of those off ramps so you don't end up crashing into the guardrail or whatever as down that path, right? So if you sense you need some help, find a way to get some help. Get into either some therapy if it's that place, but that at the very least, let's invite you into a small group setting. We are trying here at Blueprint for Men to really create this best environment to help you be discipled as a man. A well-discipled man never needs counseling. I could say that's a stereotype, but a well-discipled man who's mature and is facing reality with God in his life, likely may not need counseling, right? I don't know. I could be wrong. Holy Spirit's a great counselor, or he recognizes that he does need counseling.
Yep.
So it's just this awareness, this self-awareness. So Gabriel, thank you for helping us wind down this whole series on mental health. We really appreciate it. And we know you're well connected here into the Blueprint for Men ecosphere. So there's a pretty good chance you'll be somewhere on the radar of our podcast or some form of some public-facing stuff that we do with Blueprint for Men. However, as we finish, how do guys, if they're in your area or live in Tennessee, I don't know, you can do counseling in Tennessee? I forget how this whole licensing thing works.
It's called coaching that we do out of state bounds. But if you're in the North Georgia area, certainly we could look at if I'm a good option to do in-person counseling. So I do have an office in the North Georgia area for in-person sessions, but I can see people virtually as well.
Yeah. Okay. And what's the best way for guys to get or people to find you?
They can check out my website, renewalcounseling.org, or really the best way is probably emailing me. And I'm sure they'll have the email and the information because my last name is a little tricky, but it's Counselor Gabe Trujillo at gmail.com, and just share your interest. And there we'll talk about availability because I'm not always taking new clients, but we could certainly get you some help and some resources, and I'd love to chat with you. So that's probably the best way for someone to contact me.
Nice. Well, that is an invitation, like I said a minute ago, to one of these off-ramps. So, and then if he's too filled with his schedule, he'll point you to somebody who might be more available. And we have, as I mentioned at the top of our recording, Gabriel and I lead 2 different groups, Men of Integrity groups. If you're interested in growing yourself through the SA steps, Sexaholics Anonymous, those 12 steps. And as I've been through them myself, if I've been sponsoring guys myself to talk with them, I mean, I've just been almost blown away by just what I've learned, but what I've learned from guys, and just help guys finding a life of recovery out of that. If that's something in your life that you need help with, there's guys who are decades that are now in recovery. There are guys who are just getting started, but they're young, but they're in recovery. And again, I'm just narrowing down to that sexual purity thing. It's just, I'm getting a lot out of it myself as I've helped more guys. So, and I just love being able to do this. And I know you do too. So that's what we're here for Blueprint for Men. So if you guys listening to this liked our podcast, please just rate it and review it. And at the bottom in the footer, I keep forgetting to say this, you can click and send us a text, and I will see this text through our platform that we use. Because we want to have an episode in the future of Ask Marty Anything. So try to stump Marty with any question about Christian living for you as a man. And so Marty can answer that question. But let's try to have an episode in the future of I can just ask a question and you guys will hear from Marty. So thank you all for listening, and thank you for watching. We really appreciate it. And we will